economic impact, but we'll also discuss, how the local industry here in Southwest Florida responded, particularly restaurants and the hotel industry as a whole.
Michael?
Yes.
So I just wanted to take sorry to interrupt you, but I just want our students to know how lucky they are to be receiving this presentation. Those of you who don't know Dr. Collins, he is one of the most interesting people I've ever met. He has more than 30 years of experience in the hospitality industry. He was, I believe you were the youngest general manager for Marriott for International, right, Michael?
Oh, well, Hyatt Hotels. I was the youngest general manager with Hyatt. When I was 26 years old, I became general manager of a Hyatt hotel.
So imagine being 26 years old and already being a general manager. So that's something. And he's been general manager for a lot of hotels, a lot of brands and big hotels. So thank you very much, Michael, for being here. I'm sure you're going to tell us a little bit more about your experience, because your experience not only in the hotel industry, but also in resorts and the education industry. Thank you very much for being here. We are truly honored, and I appreciate very much you taking this time.
Well, again, I appreciate the invitation. Yeah, my background is basically, it's hard to believe this now, Damien. 40 years ago, I started working in the hotel industry as a bellman carrying bags in a hotel. I was in college at the time, didn't really plan to go into this industry as a career, but started working at a hotel, worked as a bellman carrying bags, then worked the front desk at a hotel, moved up to moved into a night audit role. And when I graduated from Michigan State University, back before any of you were born, 1982 to be precise, when I graduated, I started with Marriott Hotels when they had less than 100 hotels. So that kind of puts in perspective when you think about Marriott having 7,000 branded hotels today. I worked with Marriott when they had less than 100. As a matter of fact, I was on the opening management team as a guest services director. You would call it today. Back then we called it front office manager. I ran the front desk at a 400-room hotel, 414 rooms in Albuquerque, New Mexico when that hotel opened. And it was the 101st Marriott Hotel. Went on to manage a number of properties, ended up switching companies and going to work for Hyatt Hotels. I was recruited by one of the vice presidents for Hyatt in Atlanta when I was in my late 20s. Managed the Hyatt Regency Suites in Atlanta, which was Hyatt's second all-suite hotel. Then I managed a large hotel, the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco, which had over 800 rooms, 5 restaurants, and food and beverage outlets, 42,000 square feet of meeting space. That one hotel did nearly $100 million a year in revenue and employed over 700 employees. I then moved into the resort side of the industry. I actually managed resorts in Palm Springs, California, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a large golf resort with 3 golf courses in West Virginia. So I've been around the block, if you will, in the hotel business, in the hotel industry. As we talk about the current situation with the pandemic that's going on now, it was an event like this that actually really encouraged me to make the transition from the hotel industry into higher education. I was vice president and general manager of a large resort in West Virginia. We had 3 18-hole golf courses, hotel, conference center, a clubhouse and operation, because the golf courses, we also had homes and real estate development along the golf courses. And so I managed the clubhouse and the food and beverage operation for the residents in the community, plus operated a hotel within the resort. We had a spa and racket club, as well as an equestrian center where you could go horseback riding and that sort of thing. So it was quite an operation. But when in 2001, September 11th, 2001, you might recall there was the terrorist attack in New York City. The hotel industry here went into a major pullback. People quit traveling, and the resort I managed was put up for sale. And all of us kind of rethought what we were doing and how we were doing it at that time. And I made the decision to go into higher education at that time because it's something I always wanted to do. I love the opportunity to work with students. When I was in the industry, I loved the opportunity to work with young managers and help them develop their careers and advance their careers. And so I thought, well, gosh, what a great time maybe to kind of shift gears, or the big word these days is pivot. What a great opportunity to pivot and do something else for the second half of my career. So I was in my mid 40s. I went back to a university and earned my PhD in hospitality management. And now I've been a educator for, it's hard to believe, 15 years. It's gone very, very quickly. So
And you have published 2 books.
Yeah, I've published an internship handbook, and of course, I also published a hotel management textbook, which I hope you all will be using soon. But that's for another day. I'm still waiting to translate it to Spanish for me. So, but anyway, we'll go down that road a little bit later. But anyway, so that's my background. I'm really a hotel guy. I spent a lot of time in the hotel industry, and for the past 15 years, I've been using that experience to help students learn about our industry and get their careers started in our industry. So without further ado, let me get into a little more detail on the current pandemic and kind of how it's impacted our industry and how I see basically the opportunities I see that it presents for you as students of hospitality business. So 1 year ago, the hotel industry was enjoying unparalleled success. We were at the highest level we had ever been globally. I don't know if you can see I think I don't know if your screen's on top of it, but the orange line is Asia Pacific, the blue column is Americas, the gray is Europe, and the Middle East. I'm sorry, is Europe. I'm sorry, and the orange line or gold line is basically the Middle East and Africa. And if you'll look, occupancy globally was right around 70% occupancy. Average rates for the most part were up close to $130 per night, a little bit less in Asia. And RevPAR was at an all-time high for our industry. $93.10 in Europe and $87.87 in the Americas. And the Americas basically include North America, Latin America, Central America. So we were really enjoying unprecedented success with RevPAR, or revenue per available room, of nearly $100. That's as of the end of October, year to date, 2019. As we look forward 1 year and look through the end of October, year to date, you can see the numbers are much different. You can see that occupancy has dropped to around 40% in every region of the world. A little bit higher in Asia and the Americas, a little bit less in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. While the average daily rate has dropped from around 130 to approximately $105, just over $100, even lower than that in Asia and the Pacific Rim countries. When you get to RevPAR, you can see that RevPAR is now, before it was pushing $100, now we're down to less than $50 in revenue per available room. So the dramatic drop is unparalleled. Again, occupancy has plummeted. It's down year over year, about 35% in the Americas, about 40% across the world. The average daily rate is somewhere between 15 and 20% down from last year. And RevPAR is approximately half of what it was a year ago. In other words, we went from our best performance in history on a global basis as an industry to half that level today in the first 10 months of 2020. So that is unprecedented. As a matter of fact, the president and chief operating officer or chief executive officer for Marriott Hotels has indicated, prior situations like the global financial crisis back in 2009, it impacted revenue about 25%. When this situation first occurred in the first full month, which would have been April, as far as here in the United States, our revenue was down 90%, 90. So basically, revenue was 10% of what it was the year previous. So it was really a devastating, unprecedented impact on our industry. So today I want to talk about the immediate impact of the coronavirus pandemic on our industry. I want to help you put it in perspective. What does it mean? Without getting into all the details now, the bottom line is governments and medical providers took control when the pandemic first appeared. And to be candid with you, they really need to create a crisis in order to dramatically change behavior. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And that's what I might mean by put it in perspective. Really, what does the pandemic mean and what's the impact of the pandemic? Then we'll talk about immediate business survival strategies. What did the industry do initially, immediately following the start of the pandemic to just survive, to stay alive? Then we're going to talk about what are some of the long-term impacts on our industry down the road as a result of the impact. And then finally, I want to talk to each of you personally and talk to you about what does this mean for you? I'll give you a little preview. Your life isn't over, okay? We will bounce back. The industry will bounce back. You do have a bright future. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about year-over-year performance in the Americas. So if I look at the impact in the Americas on occupancy, average rate, and revenue per available room, basically occupancy in 2020 is sitting year to date at 43.9% occupancy in the Americas. Okay, last year we were at 67%. So that's a 34% drop. That's the purple columns on this bar chart. And again, I apologize. I assume you can see the legend. I can't see it on my screen because of the bar with everybody's. Maybe I can minimize that. There we go. Can you see this right here?
Yes, we're just fine. Thank you.
Okay, so you're fine. You could see that. I couldn't see the legend, so I want to make sure that you could follow it. So the purple bar here is, 43% occupancy versus 67 last year, a drop of 34%. If you look at average daily rate, it's at $105.20 this year, down from $131 last year, while RevPAR has dropped to $46 versus $87.87 last year, or nearly a 50% drop year to date, 2020 compared to 2019. If you look at it on a per country basis, I'm looking at year-over-year performance by country, and I put these in order from the biggest drop in RevPAR to the smallest drop in RevPAR here on the right-hand side of this table. And you'll see again, these numbers up top reflect what I just went through. They're identical for the Americas to these numbers. Just here are the values, 43%, 67%. You can see the 34% drop and nearly a 50% drop in RevPAR for the Americas as a whole. But that's not spread evenly across countries. The country that enjoyed the biggest drop, wrong use of words, that suffered The country that suffered the biggest drop in revenue per available room, of course, is Argentina with a 65.8% drop. Ecuador is right behind Argentina with a 63.6% drop in room revenue. And as you see, eventually we get to Jamaica with about a 45% drop in revenue. As you go through and you look at these numbers, you know, the average is probably around 50%. Well, it's actually 47.5%, so it's just shy of 50%. And there's considerable variation by country. I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I plan to go back to look at how did each country respond to the pandemic. Did they stop travel altogether? Did they shut down their economies? Did they shut down their airports, etc.? Because the policies employed by the various governments is obviously going to have a significant impact on the level of travel and hotel occupancy and hotel revenue per available room. There is one thing that I do want to point out though. There's considerable variation in the impact of the pandemic on average daily rate. You'll see Argentina dropped its average rate. Its average rate dropped about 24%. You'll actually see a couple of countries. If you come down here to Costa Rica, average daily rate is actually up. Aruba, it's up 16%. And Jamaica is up 2.6%. And so these countries did not react the same way when it comes to average daily rate. And I'll discuss the importance of that later in the presentation. I will say that Aruba, its peak season is that first quarter of the year. And they probably were not impacted as much by the pandemic until a little bit later in the year when they started shutting down travel to Aruba from other countries. And therefore, they enjoyed their busy season, which is January through April, where their rates are the highest, which is probably one of the reasons why, you know, they would have enjoyed those first 3-4 months of the year prior to the pandemic really impacting their business. And so they got those higher rates because their rates were still set based upon performance in the year previous, 2019. As we look at the coronavirus, these are coronavirus statistics that I took from the Johns Hopkins University COVID-19 dashboard. And I wanted to look at the impact on occupancy and the number of coronavirus cases and deaths in order to see if there was a correlation or to see how strong the correlation was to hotel occupancy. In other words, did shutting down travel and keeping people from travel, did it impact the rate with which people were either infected, or the level of deaths, the number of deaths in the country, or the percent of the population that was killed as a result of the spread of the pandemic? And I will say that there is not a statistically significant correlation. I also ran regression on all these, and there is no statistical relationship between hotel occupancies or increases or decreases in RevPAR and the impact of the actual pandemic in terms of medical outcomes. Now, if you look at this list of countries, these are all the countries that are included in this previous slide. There are a few countries that we have COVID-19 statistics where we don't have hotel statistics because those hotels just don't have enough. I got the hotel statistics from STR, and those countries just don't have enough hotels that report their statistics for STR to project the impact on the hotel industry in those countries. Countries like Bolivia and Uruguay are examples. You don't see those on the list. So as we look at the impact, I want to point out a couple of things. So first, I put the population of the country. And again, one of the things that has been focused on in the news media is the number of cases. And if you look at the number of infections, so if I go down this column right here, and I know that it's been really a focal point here in the United States of we've had 5 million infections, 7 million infections, 9 million infections. I mean, over and over and over again, we heard about the number of infections because 12,613,248, which is the number as of today, is an incredibly high number. And people say, oh my gosh, 12 million people have the coronavirus in the United States. I still remind students and everybody else that represents less than 4% of our population. Don't get me wrong. I don't want anything I say today to minimize the fact that people are sick. You know, we do not want people to be sick. We want to avoid people getting sick at all costs, correct? And certainly, more tragically, we want to avoid the number of deaths. And 260,000 people have died in the United States. That's a tragedy. That's affected 260,000 families. And I don't want to minimize that impact at all. Okay, I don't want to say that's, you know, there's no acceptable level of death. So as I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking to myself, I can sound kind of harsh or uncaring. I don't want it to come across that way at all. I'm just trying to look at it rationally. And I want to say that it's a tragedy that 260,000 people have died. But I remember back in March when the pandemic first hit. And I remember them talking about, and there were all these models that were projecting the number of deaths that were going to occur. And they were projecting deaths in the millions in the United States. They were projecting, 2, 3, 4 million people could die from this pandemic. And we were concerned with hospitals being overrun. Like we were going to have all these people coming to the hospital sick from the pandemic, and we wouldn't have hospital beds to service all these people. We wouldn't have the respirators we need. We wouldn't have the medical professionals to care for all these sick people. And it became evident shortly after the pandemic first broke. Now, I will tell you, I have a unique perspective. And Damien might remember this. My daughter is in medical school right now. She lives in New York City, which was the epicenter of the pandemic. She works in New York Presbyterian Hospital, which is the teaching hospital for Columbia University. Columbia University is an Ivy League school, one of the top medical schools in the United States. Many of the earliest COVID-19 cases in New York went to New York Presbyterian Hospital to be treated by the Columbia University doctors. Because it's one of the leading research medical schools in our country. And so my daughter was sent home. She was sent here to Florida when the pandemic first broke. All the medical students were sent away for safety's sake, away from the pandemic, because they were still in school, still training to be doctors, and they didn't want them to become infected. So she was here from March, the middle of March, around the 16th of March, until the 1st of July, which is when she returned to medical school. So for those 3 months, March to April, May, June, those 3 months, April, May, and June, she was here. Yet she was online every day with professors at the medical school getting updates. So I was able to eavesdrop on some of those updates. And again, 260,000 deaths is a tragedy, and I'm not minimizing the impact of those 260,000 deaths. But quite frankly, in the early days, they feared it was going to be much greater than that. So if there's any silver lining, if you will, to this cloud, the silver lining is the pandemic did not cause as much death as was originally anticipated. Again, any death is tragic, but we're thankful, we can be thankful that it was not nearly as devastating maybe as people felt it could be. The news media really had a job to do, and that was to get everybody on alert, to get everybody aware. You know, we had daily updates from senior government officials and health professionals every single day, the Center for Disease Control. And I'm sure those things happened in your country as well, where we were hearing from the Center for Disease Control, from the big name here was Dr. Fauci, was the infectious disease expert that was kind of leading the news media with information and putting out warnings to everybody on what we needed to do to stay safe and to keep our families safe. And the initial response was, you know, shut down businesses, shut down everything. Our university, Florida Gulf Coast University, we went remote, as I'm sure you guys did. And we finished the spring semester teaching all of our classes online instead of in person. We sent our students home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One thing interesting in the United States is that we have 50 states. And those 50 states, as you well know, are governed by different state governments. And most of the restrictions that were put on people in the various, throughout the United States, those restrictions were placed by individual states, not by the federal government. So the federal government, because of the structure of our government, the president of the United States and the Congress can't say, okay, everybody has to stay home, everybody has to wear masks, everybody has to do this. It's up to the states to make those decisions. And because we have a variety of state leaders and state governors with different political views, different positions politically, different opinions, being advised by different medical experts, we implemented a variety of strategies in the United States. There are some states that have been completely shut down and remain today very much shut down as far as the economy shut down, people working from home, all that sort of thing. Other states, Florida being one of them, has given more freedom to individuals to make their own choice on what they want to do. For example, our university made the decision to come back to campus in August. So since August 17th, I have been teaching traditional classes in a classroom with students in my classroom. Now, not all the students have elected to take in-person classes, and we've taken a number of measures. Like the classes are at like half the number of normal students. Everybody is socially distanced, 6 feet apart. All the students wear masks in the classroom. I wear a mask in the classroom. So we're all wearing masks. We're socially distant. We have wipes as soon as you walk in the room, where every student grabs a wipe and they have to wipe down the area where they're sitting and the table and everything around them. So we've taken a lot of measures. Many of our students are living on campus in dormitories, yet we've set aside a couple of dorms, college dormitories, which are like apartment buildings, where our students live on our campus. We've set aside a couple of those dormitories for students that get infected with the virus and or that have been exposed to the virus. And so we have a couple of dormitories we use just to quarantine students. I've had students that have missed class, some because they have the virus, and I've had other students miss class because, for example, their roommate had the virus, and so they were forced to quarantine. We have to go on a phone app every day, and we have to answer a series of questions. And based upon that series of questions, it lets us know if we're allowed to come to campus. or if we have to quarantine, or if somebody that we've had close contact with. So if I have a student in my classroom that has the coronavirus, then I'll be notified that I need to quarantine. Fortunately, I did not have to quarantine. I did have a couple of students that tested positive for the virus. However, they were quarantined before they came to my class. So a number of steps that have been taken. So it'll be very interesting. I'm sure there'll be a lot of research done on the different strategies and which strategies were most effective in preventing the spread of the coronavirus. But there's one thing that I want to point out on this statistic on the screen, and that is the percentage of the population that has died as a result of the coronavirus. I know it's a sad statistic, but we're in a pandemic. We need to talk about these things. If you look at the totals, let me explain. I have the population here in this column. So in the Americas, we have nearly 1 billion people, actually 891 million people in these countries that are listed. We've had 24,860,000 infections. We've had 687,266 deaths. So if you look at the number of infections and the number of deaths, we can say that 2.8% of the people infected died from the coronavirus. But if you look at it as a percentage of the population, take this 687,000 people that have died in these countries, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. So there's 15 countries listed here. And these 15 countries, we've had 687,000 people die from the coronavirus. Yet, if I divide that by 891 million people total, that's less than 1/10 of 1%. So 0.077% of the 900 million people have died from the coronavirus. And again, we mourn every one of those deaths. And we're certainly not happy that nearly 700,000 people have died in these 15 countries from the coronavirus. But you'll notice how this number is much more consistent, right? It's somewhere between 0.008, so 0.008 of a percent, up to about 1/10 of 1%. This number here, the percentage of people infected that have died, really varies widely. You look at Mexico, almost 10%. If you look at Ecuador, 7%. You look at Colombia, 2.8%. But don't worry about those numbers, and let me tell you why. The difference is the level of testing. We only know people are infected if they were tested. You look at the United States, for example, where you have 260,000 deaths, more deaths as a percentage of the total deaths than any other country, because indeed we're the largest country in the Americas, but only 2.1%. And I would say that's in large part because more people are being tested in the United States than in many of these other countries. For example, in Mexico, there's 1 million infections. I would venture to say that people that are being tested in Mexico are usually being tested because they're sick. They're sick, they go to the hospital, they're showing symptoms of the coronavirus, so they get tested for the coronavirus. A larger proportion of those cases are going to die from the coronavirus because not as many healthy people are being tested. In the United States, many asymptomatic people are being tested. So for example, I'll give you an example. At our university, we had a large number of cases in one of our dormitories. In one of our dorms where mostly freshman students live, our first year students live all in the same dorm. And there was one dormitory that had a very high number of cases being reported. So we made the decision as a university to go through and test every single student in that dormitory. We went through and tested every single student, whether they had symptoms or not, whether they had been close to somebody with the coronavirus or not. We tested everybody. It resulted in a lot of negative tests. So it also resulted in some positive tests of people who didn't even appear to have the COVID-19 virus. They weren't sick from it. And I've talked to some students and some other professors who had the coronavirus and have already recovered from the coronavirus. And they said, I really didn't get that sick from the virus. So there are people, as we know, that are asymptomatic. I could talk for an hour just on the details of this spreadsheet, and I don't want to do that, or this table. But I just want to point out that the probability of dying from the coronavirus is very, very low. That's really what we learned from this, looking at this. As a matter of fact, the survival rate is over 99.9% for every single country. So if you're a healthy person, the probability of you getting the coronavirus and getting sick to the point where you're no longer on this earth, it's less than a 99.9% chance that's going to happen to you. So in other words, there's a 99.9% chance of everybody in our society, every person in the world surviving this pandemic. Most of us are going to survive. And the beautiful thing is we know the risk factors. We know the risk factors. People who are older are more likely to not survive if they get the pandemic. People, over 65 or 70 years of age. People with underlying conditions are more likely not to survive. And so many in the United States and many of the governors in the United States have taken the approach that we can't afford to shut down the economy. We can't afford to have people losing their business, losing their livelihood, and all these sorts of things. We can't afford to not have students going to school. We can't afford to do these things when we know less than 0.1% of people are going to die from this virus. And we know who the likely people are to die of this virus. So let's focus on protecting them. Let's focus on protecting the most vulnerable to the virus and let people that are low risk get back to work, get back to school, get back living their lives. And so that's been the approach, certainly here in Florida and in many other states. Although there's still some debate going on in our country, and it'll be interesting to see, we just had a presidential election. We have a new president coming in, and he's talked about, when he comes into office, shutting down our economy again. But there's going to be a lot of debate on, is that necessary? As a matter of fact, my wife works for the local school system. Our students are back in school in our public schools. So our schools are open and our students are going to school. Why? Because students, young people generally are not impacted by the coronavirus. If they do get the virus, chances are they're going to recover from it quickly or even be asymptomatic. So we've moved forward here, putting our school. Now, don't get me wrong, we're also offering school online for people who don't want to take the risk of going to school, or if they're in a high-risk group. Let me compare this real quickly, because I know I'm already running out of time, and I have a lot more to cover. Let me compare this to 100 years ago. We know there was this Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago. It was also an H1N1 influenza virus. It occurred in 1918 at the end of World War II. Really started in 1917 and ran through 1920. It impacted 25% of the global population. Some people think, because it's harder to get statistics from 100 years ago and not as accurate records were kept, some people believe as much as 33%, or over 660 million people were impacted by the Spanish flu. Much larger impact than we're seeing with the current pandemic. Of those that were infected, 5 to 10% of those infected with the virus perished as a result of contracting the virus. That varied, though, much more widely based upon the different areas of the world and the status of medical care and the availability of medical care in various areas of the world. In total, it is estimated that between 1.25% and 2.5%, so 1.25% to 2.5% of the global population perished. Again, 25 to 50 million people. Again, compare that to this number right here, 99.9%, less than, I'm sorry, right here, 0.077%. So in other words, if you do the math on that, it's actually, you were 16 times more likely to perish of the pandemic back in 1918 than you are the pandemic today. Again, there was increased variation by region. The other thing that was very interesting about the pandemic back in 1918, though, was it impacted children and people from 20 to 40 years of age, as well as elderly people over 65. So people between 40 and 65 were not impacted nearly as much. They were not nearly as likely to die. So that's another good thing about, if there is a good thing about the pandemic, the current pandemic, compared to the Spanish flu pandemic, is, you know, our young people are less likely to get sick from the coronavirus pandemic. Young people such as yourselves from 20 up till 65 years of age are less likely to be negatively impacted by the coronavirus than were impacted by the Spanish flu pandemic. So, you know, we need to keep it in perspective as we move forward from here. So let's talk about how the hospitality industry responded here in the United States, because that's what I have first-hand knowledge of. First, I must comment that obviously the reaction to the pandemic varies by nation, and the government reaction to the pandemic in large part is going to determine the impact on individual businesses, individual families, and individual people, members of society. We were very fortunate here in the United States that our government did react in an unprecedented way to the pandemic. First, they passed the CARES Act. The CARES Act was the largest financial relief package, and I apologize for that typo, but the largest with a T, financial relief package ever passed by our Congress and signed by our president. It was actually nearly $2 trillion when you get all the impact of all the spending that happened. Huge economic stimulus package, bigger than the stimulus package that was put in place with the 2009 financial crisis, by far. It provided billions of dollars to the states, to each state government, and then the states could use that money as they saw fit to minimize negative impact within their states. There were provisions within the act designed to protect businesses So there was money available, loans that were available to businesses, provided they kept their employees employed and they kept paying their real estate expenses, either their rent or their mortgages on any real estate assets that they had. There was extensive money available to help the unemployed. Those whose jobs were not saved by the act were given better than typical unemployment benefits. So there were additional unemployment benefits given to people. Actually, it was an extra $600 a week to everybody who was on across the country who was on unemployment as a result of losing their job because of the pandemic. There were also a number of steps taken to reduce the spread of the virus and a variety of medical interventions. We ramped up production of ventilators. We expanded, we built temporary hospitals and took all kind of steps in order to prepare to treat people who had the virus and to prevent the spread of the virus. There was also a lot of money put into research to generate a vaccine to keep the virus from spreading. And we actually shortened the Food and Drug Administration has to approve medical protocols and has to approve vaccines, but there was a provision here that we could put all those on a fast track so that we could implement treatment programs and we could use certain drugs and develop vaccines and put vaccines out on the market more quickly and not go through the normal lengthy testing and everything. So the government reaction in large part helped a lot of businesses, including hospitality businesses. Let me get into some of the specific things we did that hospitality businesses did in response to the pandemic. Of course, the first thing we did was we reduced labor costs. Many hospitality businesses furloughed workers, so they laid off workers. Our biggest variable expense are employees. So many employees were laid off, or their labor costs were reduced because they got government loans to cover their labor costs if they kept people employed. Those government loans turned into grants if they kept their employees, if they used a certain proportion of the money to pay for wages for employees. So I know of hotels and restaurants here in the local area that kept their employees even though they didn't have customers, even though they were closed, and they cleaned things and did all sorts of projects to keep people busy and use that government money to offset their labor costs. In addition, they started looking for alternative sources of revenue. Although many restaurants were closed initially, we did allow restaurants to prepare food to go. So most restaurants became food to go places. They were preparing meals, they were marketing their services, they went to their email list of customers and they started saying, hey, we've got some great deals for you if you want to buy dinner and we'll have it delivered to your house, or you can come by the restaurant and pick it up. And so they look for alternative sources of revenue. Here in Florida, they also allowed restaurants and hotels to actually sell liquor for consumption elsewhere. Normally, we have on-premise liquor license. If you buy a drink, a glass of wine, a beer, or a cocktail in a restaurant, you have to drink it in the restaurant. But we were allowed to sell not only food, but also alcoholic beverages for sale off premises. In addition, many hospitality businesses immediately contacted their landlord. If I owned and operated a restaurant and I leased my space, so I rented, let's say, a place in a shopping mall, I contacted the shopping mall, because remember the shopping mall, you know, they realize what's going on. And we went to those landlords immediately and said, hey, we need to work something out. I'm not going to be able to pay my rent, but I want to stay in business so that after the pandemic, I can start paying you rent again. So they renegotiated their lease, they got extensions. Also part of the CARES Act, landlords were not allowed to foreclose on businesses and or on tenants that were renting property from them. In addition to that, capital equipment costs. If you look at your, if you were paying leases on like kitchen equipment in your kitchen or laundry equipment in your laundry, etc. Again, contact the owner of that equipment and say, hey, under the circumstances, I can't make my lease payments. So we're just going to defer the lease payments for several months as we work together to get through these pandemics. Part of the CARES Act also provided loans, government-backed loans. So the loans were issued by banks and other creditors, but the government secured those loans and guaranteed those loans for creditors that offered small business people's loans to help borrow money to get through the pandemic. One thing that most hospitality businesses did very well is they did maintain their pricing. They maintained their pricing. In other words, you know, we realized that the drop in demand wasn't going to be offset. Like, you know, generally hospitality businesses, you know, demand goes down, what happens? Hotels drop their room rates saying, if I charge less money, more people will be willing to pay to stay in a hotel. Well, in this case, people couldn't stay in a hotel no matter how low I took the rate. So we really encourage businesses to keep their pricing where it was. As a matter of fact, many restaurants increased their prices because they had to offset the additional costs of delivering food and packaging food to go. So we had to maintain our pricing. The other thing we tried to do is shrink, you know, we told hospitality businesses to shrink their assets. So for example, if you have a 250 seat restaurant, you know, operate, at first we had to operate at 25% capacity once our businesses were allowed to reopen. So we operated at 25% capacity. We went ahead and only opened 25% of our seating. We staffed for 25% of our seating. We just operated the business as if we were a smaller business. And recognize that. Some hotels are actually looking at it now. How can we use our hotel rooms for alternative use? Matter of fact, many hotels were on standby to use hotel rooms as hospital rooms. Remember, there was this initial fear that we wouldn't have enough hospital beds available. And so there was some talk of using hotels as, or certain proportion of hotels, certain floors as hospital rooms. Of course, we didn't come to that point. We didn't need to do that because we didn't have nearly the level of hospitalization or cases that needed hospitalization as we expected. So these are some of the strategies that hospitality businesses did immediately to survive. I was going to talk a little bit more detail about what happened here in Fort Myers, Florida, where our university is located. But I can see by the time I don't have time to get into this level of detail, so I'm going to skip over these slides. But I am going to point out a couple of things. Here in Fort Myers, Florida, where we run last year we ran a 67% occupancy versus 74% in Florida and 70% in the United States as a whole. That's in 2019. Our average rate was 155, a little bit higher than the average for the state of Florida and the average in the United States. We're a very upscale market. And our RevPAR, of course, is a little bit higher than the United States as a whole. But when we looked at that, you can see that our busiest time here is in January, February, March. This is occupancy and average rate and RevPAR by month. Our busiest time is January, February, March, and April. And that's when the pandemics hit us last year. It really hit us in March. And our slowest time here is in August and September. If you look at how COVID-19, and I'll come back to this in just a second, hit us, it really hit us in March, in the middle of March. It was around the 15th of March when all of a sudden we had to shut down our hotels, and we were in peak season. And you can see in April, our occupancy and RevPAR dropped tremendously. Occupancy dropped 76%, average rate 57%, and revenue an astonishing 90%. Huge drop in the month of April, but it did start to rebound as soon as May, June, and July. You can see here, occupancy. Again, January, February were actually higher this year than last year, but then March, that's when the pandemic first started, impacted the second half of the month. And then April, it plummeted to 18% occupancy, but we did start to rebound, 27% in May, 42% in June, 49% in July. And you'll also see that although our average rate dropped in March and April, it actually started to rebound in May as well. And actually in June and July, our average rate was higher than last year. So we were able in our local market to maintain our pricing. And why is that important? Let me go back to this slide right here. Typically what happens in the hotel industry, this graph, I know there's a lot of going on your screen. Let me explain it real quickly. Across the bottom is the year. I go all the way back to 2000. This 62.5, 58.5. This is occupancy, this blue line, year over year for our market here in Fort Myers, Florida. Our average rate is here on the red line. And you can see here on the gray line is our RevPAR, or green line is our revenue per available room. You can see how it fluctuates year over year. But I want to pay particular attention to the average rate. In 2001, an event happened. We know what that was. It was the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And our occupancy dropped as a result of that. We also were impacted by increase in supply. You can see here on the bottom line. But here's the important thing to note. And this is good advice to all the students out there as you move forward. If you look at our average rate, our average rate in 2001, just prior to the terrorist attack, which happened in September of that year, was at 115. We didn't get back to over $115 until 5 years later. It took 5 years for our ADR to recover from the terrorist attacks. Then our occupancy started to grow again. Our occupancy and our average rate, you can see here, average rate went up considerably. But then what happened in the end of late 2008 going into 2009? We had another huge drop in average rate. Why? Because of the financial crisis. So 2009 is when a bunch of banks went bankrupt, right? And we had the financial crisis and there wasn't money available. We went into the Great Recession, it was called, because of the financial crisis of 2009. And it took many years for our average rate and our occupancy to grow back up. As a matter of fact, our average rate in 2008 was $139 here in Fort Myers, Florida. We didn't get our average rate back to above that level until here at $144. Again, it took 7 years for our average rate to recover. It hurts our industry when the knee-jerk reaction or the initial reaction of the industry is to drop our prices because of a drop in demand. There's never a reason to drop. When demand drops for reasons outside of our control, there's no reason to drop our prices, to drop our pricing. Because when we do that, it takes years for our average rate or our pricing to recover, which slows down the eventual growth and healthiness of our industry. So there's somewhat of a silver lining to this whole drop that we just suffered from the pandemic. And that is that although our revenue in Fort Myers, Florida is down 30%, our RevPAR, it's entirely due to a 30% drop in occupancy. And our average rate is actually still the same as it was last year. And so I want all of you to take away that one valuable lesson from this situation. In the future, you're going to face challenges. There's going to be situations like this pandemic, and your initial reaction and feeling is, oh my gosh, occupancy is dropping, business is dropping, we got to cut our prices. When occupancy and demand is dropping due to economic challenges or a pandemic or other factors, no matter how low you drop your prices, it's not going to bring demand back. So wait it out and hold firm with your prices. That's one valuable lesson we have to learn. And we've learned that, we hope, from that financial crisis in 2009 and from the terrorist attacks in 2001. Hopefully it's not going to take us 5 years or 7 years to regain our average price, our average rate, because hopefully we've learned that lesson, and that'll help our industry recover more quickly. I know I'm pretty much out of time, and we need to leave some time for question and answer. But I do want to talk about just a few things as far as long-term opportunities for the hospitality industry as a result of the pandemic. I told you earlier some of the survival strategies that took place. Businesses reduced labor costs. They found alternative sources of revenue. They managed their real estate costs and negotiated reductions in real estate costs or delays in paying their rent or mortgage payments during the crisis. They did the same with their capital equipment costs. They secured additional sources of credit, and they worked hard to maintain their pricing, as I just pointed out. So how can we use these take advantage of these survival strategies we've already employed to come back better and stronger than others? One of the things the hotel industry and hospitality industry is going to do is they're going to look for ways to make permanent the temporary labor costs. Excuse me. As you know, we reduced our labor costs. We laid off people, we furloughed people. Before we bring employees back, we're going to ask ourselves, do we really need those employees? It's also a great opportunity to only bring back your best employees, right? And get rid of employees that maybe were ready to move on to other things. Some of your employees who you've laid off have probably taken other jobs and may not be interested in coming back. That may actually be a good thing for them and a good thing for your business if they were ready for a change and this situation really kind of forced them to make that change. Some of those alternative sources of revenue you identified, perhaps you can make some of those permanent new sources of revenue. I know Marriott Hotels is already looking at the fact that many offices have these big communal office areas where people work next to each other at desks in cubicles. Yet with the pandemic, maybe they need private offices. So some Marriott hotels are already starting to rent out hotel rooms, taking the beds out and making them into little office suites and renting out permanent offices, because people struggle to work at home because of all the interruptions that they have at home. And so they want somewhere to work, but they can't go back to their office. So hotels are taking advantage of that and renting hotel rooms as temporary offices. In addition to that, a real estate asset is worth, the value of a real estate asset is based upon the amount of cash flow it generates. Now that RevPAR is down, hotels are not going to generate as much cash flow. That's going to reduce the value of many hotels. So those companies, investors, organizations, individuals that have lots of cash, that have money, are probably going to be able to buy some hotels at a deep discount, because now that the hotel is not performing as well, the value of the hotel isn't as great, and therefore there's some opportunities for some of the real estate investment trusts and other hotel investors to buy hotels at a discounted price, at a price lower than it would cost to build that hotel. Same thing with capital equipment. Some of you culinary students and other hospitality students who dream of opening your own restaurant, guess what? Some of the not as good restaurants, the not as successful restaurants have gone out of business. I'm not happy that those restaurants went out of business. However, that means they might have used restaurant equipment. There may be a surplus of used restaurant equipment from some of these businesses that failed during the pandemic that suppliers, restaurant equipment suppliers, will be looking to sell and get rid of. And they'll be willing and able to sell it at a discounted price. So you may be able to go into the restaurant business after the pandemic for a cheaper price. Matter of fact, you might find some former restaurants that are no longer in business, and you'll be able to lease their restaurant space that's already got a kitchen and already got a dining room and already has equipment, and secure that lease on that space, and or buy that real estate asset, buy that building, and or buy that equipment at a reduced price. So this is an opportunity for you. You also have expertise. If you have expertise in this industry, in the hospitality industry, you can provide that expertise to lenders. You know, there's a lot of lenders out there that are making loans to hospitality businesses to help them through this time. Those lenders are going to need advisors and people that know the hospitality industry working for them to help advise them on how to make certain that the hospitality businesses they lent money to are operating efficiently and effectively so they're able to repay those loans. Again, if you were able to maintain your pricing, you're going to be able to more quickly reestablish higher pricing. So again, hopefully you that are working in the hospitality industry, you that know people, you students that know people in hotels, you know, tell them to hang on to their pricing. When we reopen our businesses after the pandemic's over, don't open with lower prices. There's no reason to if everybody goes out there together and maintains pricing. And of course, a lot of hospitality businesses have learned ways to leverage technology during this pandemic. Matter of fact, we have during the pandemic, we are not cleaning hotel rooms every day. Matter of fact, we're only cleaning hotels upon request. I think that trend will continue after the pandemic's over. We've also set up apps for customers so that they can actually communicate what time they're going to be out of their rooms so their rooms can be cleaned. You know, that type of technology is going to continue to be used after the pandemic. So there's been a lot of technological developments during the pandemic to deal with some of the issues, and that technology is going to continue to be able to be leveraged after the pandemic. I'm going to close by talking about what you can do as an individual. First, I want everybody out there to understand the industry will recover. Right now, it seems like the hospitality industry has been devastated and it's never going to be the same. The bottom line is people want to travel. People want to walk on a beach. People want to go out for dinner. People are going to get married. Companies want to have meetings and conventions. We want to go to Disney World. All these things, we want these things to happen. The industry will recover. I've seen many drops, never like this. I've never seen as severe an impact as COVID-19 has had on our industry. But I've seen some downturns and it always comes back. It will again. Also, appreciate the value of your hospitality business education. Your hospitality business education has prepared you, yes, to work in the hospitality industry, but in many other industries, the healthcare industry, a multitude of business industries. You've got interpersonal skills, you've got business management skills, you've got, you know, accounting, you know, finance. Use your business skills. You will find a job. You will find opportunities, maybe outside our industry, maybe not doing exactly what you want, maybe not in the hotel or restaurant industry right away, but certainly you can work in healthcare, plenty of opportunities there, for example, and many other examples. In addition, your pathway has been cleared. I tell my students here at Florida Gulf Coast, you want to work for Marriott? Guess what? Marriott's going to have a lot of jobs over the next 5 years. As the industry recovers, they're going to be rehiring people. There were people that had worked for Marriott for many years, for example, who left Marriott and took other jobs, who will not come back. Now those jobs are open and they're going to have to be filled by new people that they hire. So there may actually be more opportunities as the industry recovers. Your expertise is in demand. Your expertise is in demand. The business world is always looking for people who know how to motivate others, who know how to deliver incredible customer experiences. And that's what we do in the hospitality industry. So assess your opportunities. Look at all the opportunities that are out there. Look in other industries and find your pathway to success. A lot of what happens to you moving forward is dependent upon what you see in this photograph. Some of you may see a beautiful sunset, but I would say that's not a sunset at all. It's a sunrise. It's about mindset. We're at the beginning of something great. We're at the beginning of something great. If that's your outlook, the sun is rising. We can only go up from here. We have bright futures. Take advantage of the sunrise and rise with the sun, because the industry will come back. Business will come back. Of course, the old cliche, if you look at this glass and don't say it's half full instead of half empty, you got to focus on changing your mindset. You've got to look at the glass as half full. So make your plans. Establish specific, measurable goals. What do you want to accomplish, and by when do you want to accomplish? What are the action steps you need to take to achieve those goals? Prioritize those actions. What actions can you take now in the current environment, in the current situation? Take advantage of opportunities as they arise. You may be discouraged right now. You may be discouraged at times. Many times over the next couple of months or even the next year or so, you may be discouraged, but you have to wake up every day and say, I'm going to keep looking for those opportunities. Collaborate with others, talk to your peers, talk to your professors, talk to people out there in the world, talk to business owners, talk to people, collaborate. What's going on? How can you help? How can you get involved? Be ready to jump in and participate where you can, because it's all about taking action. You've got to act. It's easy in this situation to sit at home with four walls around you and feel like the world's closing in and you're all alone. We are all in the same place. We're all in the same situation. However, in a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and certainly 20 years from now, each of us will be in a different place. Only you can determine what that different place is for you. And it's based upon one thing: how well you use your time. What can you do each and every day to move forward? Should I be taking some classes? Should I be saving up my money? Should I be putting together a business plan for a business I want to open after the pandemic? Am I going to take advantage of the fact that there's going to be lots of restaurant space available to lease? Am I going to take advantage of the fact there's going to be a lot of restaurant equipment available at bargain prices? Make your plans now so you're ready to act when the opportunity presents itself. And now we have basically 3 or 4 minutes to take some questions. I hope you found these comments helpful.
Thank you very much, Michael, for everything. I think was really interesting. So we will go to the part for the questions. So if you have any question, please let me know. As you know, you can raise your hand and ask some questions. You have Michael here, and you have a great opportunity to ask him about any topic in the industry, because if there is somebody that can answer you, is Michael. So we have Amy, please. We can start with you.
Okay. Good afternoon, first of all, and I wanted to say thank you. I'm very grateful for this opportunity and for this whole conversation because I was willing to listen to some good, light-hearted, heartwarming news. And I just wanted to know, like, how did the closing of Disney affect Florida as a whole, and how do you think it is affecting California? Because in the U.S. we can see how these different states are managing this situation in different ways, and I think we can mainly see that through Disneyland and Disney World. And I wanted to know, how is this situation affecting as a whole each state, and how is it affecting differently each one of them?
Right. Let me talk about Disney specifically. Disney World here in Florida is open. It's open and it's operating, as you may or may not be aware. Matter of fact, I get emails from Disney almost daily because I've been to Disney quite a few times in my life, and I'm on their email distribution list. And they're offering incredible deals for people who live in Florida. We basically can go to Disney for less than $50 a day. Which is unprecedented pricing, and they have hotel rooms available for less than $100 a night on Disney property. So they're offering a lot of deals right now to the locals because they know that people don't want to necessarily get on airplanes and travel long distance. Their international travel is at a standstill, and even travel from outside the region. But they're trying to really focus on the drive market. They've limited the number of guests that go in the park every day. And I'll be candid with you. I've talked to some students who have been to Disney in the last 3-4 months. They said it's the best Disney experience they ever had in their life. They said you literally can ride Space Mountain, get off and walk right back through and ride it 2 times in a row without even stopping. How often can you do that, right? So again, you got to look at the silver lining. Look at the silver lining to the cloud. Right now, you can visit Disney for a lower price than ever, and it's not crowded because they're limiting the number of people that are allowed in the park every day. If you look at Disney stock, it's actually at a higher price now than it was before the pandemic. Okay, Disney stock yesterday was trading for $151 per share. Back before the pandemic, it was at around $120, $130 a share. And a year ago, it was only at it was around $100 a share. So Disney stock is actually up because people are now optimistic. There's now a vaccine that has come out here in the United States that's just beginning to be distributed. And so people know Disney is going to come back, and the holidays are a busy time for Disney, and they're expecting good things in the first quarter of the year.
Great. Do we have another question? As we wait for other hand to raise, I wanted to ask you, Michael, about I'm completely agree about in our industry, the opportunity that we have to change our mind, to do other things, so we can go back to the revenues that we used to have. As students, as there are students that are going out into the industry, and right now it's a little bit hard because the jobs are there are not so many companies that are hiring. Do you think right now is the moment to think to make your own business and to change, and not only to go to work for a company, but also to work for yourself? Do you think this is the moment to do that?
Yeah, never have we been in this situation. You know, I have 3 children. I mentioned, you know, my daughter, who's the middle child, who's in medical school, but my youngest son, he was actually working at a resort in the culinary field. He wants to open his own restaurant someday. And he was working at a large resort in the banquet area as a banquet chef. And of course, when the pandemic hit, it's in California, San Diego area, the 𝐷𝐸 Resort, if you want to look it up. He was at the 𝐷𝐸 Resort, big hotel, big resort, golf course, the whole shebang. And basically, all the banquets and everything canceled. And so he got furloughed. He got laid off of work, as did most of the employees in the resort. So when he was first furloughed, he kind of panicked. He ended up going to work for Amazon because everybody was buying everything online and Amazon was still functioning. So he worked for Amazon, working at night from 8 at night till 4 in the morning, putting things in boxes that people purchased and putting boxes on trucks. And he hated it. And he said, I miss the hospitality industry so badly. I miss the resort industry. I miss working at the resort. I miss being in the kitchen. So what this experience did for him is it reassured that he was in the right field, because he realized how much he enjoyed. He always enjoyed going to work, and now he was like dreading going to work. So it kind of reaffirmed his love for the industry. And he's made the decision now. He's in the process of moving actually here to Florida. Now, he was fortunate because his dad lives in Florida and he could move here. But I used to teach, as you know, at the University of San Francisco. I used to live in California, and he went to school out there, and he stayed out there when I came to Florida. But California is more shut down. So he is moving here because we're going into our busiest time of year, January, February, March. He wants to someday open a restaurant. So he is coming here so he can work in a kitchen, because here restaurants aren't closed, hotels are not closed, and he can get back in the kitchen and work in the hospitality industry again. When he gets here, we're going to start working on his business plan. We're actually already out looking. A number of restaurants have already closed in this area. They were restaurants that were probably on shaky financial ground before the pandemic, and the pandemic put them under. As soon as he gets here later in December, we're going to go out and start looking at some of these restaurants to see if there's either a restaurant for sale or a restaurant for lease that we can purchase and or lease so that he can open it as his restaurant, whether it be a year from now or 18 months from now, once we feel we're far enough, down the road. One other thing I will mention, he also took advantage during this time that he was laid off from the hotel business to participate in the gig economy. You know what I refer to, the gig economy? He worked for, he has a decent car. So he was out delivering meals. He actually worked for some restaurants and some grocery stores, delivering groceries to people's houses and all that kind of stuff. And again, he was able to work at his own schedule using his cell phone and going to like DoorDash. You're familiar with DoorDash? I assume you have DoorDash or something similar down there, or Uber Eats and those type of services.
Uber Eats we do have.
Yeah. So it's kind of like Uber Eats, but DoorDash delivers anything. It'll go to the liquor store and pick up booze for you. It'll go to the grocery store and pick up groceries for you, whatever you want to order. And so he took advantage of that. And so we need to be resourceful and do those sorts of things. Go out and start your own food delivery business. There's elderly people who are kind of shut in, who need food delivered to their houses. Contact a home care agency. Here in Florida, we have a lot of retirees, and we have students that are out working for home care agencies. Just visiting people who are kind of, I'm an older person. And for example, my mom, who's 87, and my stepdad, who's 90, I go and check on them at least once a week, make sure everything's okay. I run to the store for them and do that sort of thing. You could start a business doing that, contacting older people that you know, network through your grandparents, and start your own business doing these types of services, because those are hospitality services, which are basically providing services one-on-one, one customer, one guest at a time, to make somebody's life better. And there's all sorts of things we can do during this pandemic to help others and earn a little money for ourselves. You never know what it's going to develop into, right?
Definitely. It's in these moments of crisis that we can get creative and look for other opportunities. As always, Michael, it's really a pleasure to have you here at our university. It's a shame that this time is by Zoom and not in our campus, but I hope we can see each other again soon, either in Quito or in Florida. But it's always a pleasure to hear you. You always have so many things, so many information that is really valuable. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you again very soon.
Okay, well, one last little plug. JetBlue is flying again between Ecuador and Fort Lauderdale. So you can get to Florida on JetBlue. As a matter of fact, my wife is flying to Ecuador tomorrow to visit her family for the holidays. So you can travel JetBlue, flying from Fort Lauderdale to here. If you want to come to Florida, come and give us a visit. And I'll look forward to seeing you, I hope, in June or July this summer.
Perfect. That sounds really great. Thank you very much again for being here. Thank you. Gracias, chicos, por estar aquí. Nos vemos en el siguiente coloquio.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you much.
Michael.
Bye.